Welcome to the Digital Dive, where we take a deep dive into digital assets. My name is Eric, and today I am joined with Matthias Goldmann. He is the COO of Constellation Network. Matthias, how are you doing today?
Good, man. Thanks for the invite. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, this is part 2 of our founder series that I'm doing here with Constellation. And today, like I said, we have the absolute pleasure of learning a little bit more about Matthias and his background, which I've been looking into some of the stuff that he has done over the years, and it is extremely impressive. And I know you're all going to be very excited to see just how multifaceted you are, really, in a lot of different aspects and avenues. So, but first, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for people who may not know?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Matthias Goldmann. I'm the COO of Constellation Network. So I'm one of the co-founders. My expertise lies mainly in operational excellence, like I like to say, and crypto finance. So running a lot of the stuff in the background, sometimes not as visible as the other founders, but nonetheless pretty vital to a lot of the successes we've been having the last years.
Absolutely. And you know, the more I learned about your story and your background, I can see just how, you know, incredibly, yeah, it's maybe not like on the front end, as Diggles may call sexy stuff, but it's definitely extremely vital. And I know you've been extremely vital to the team, as Altif has told me.
Okay.
So, yeah. So let's get into some questions here. Now, we have to start with this one just because it is, and I'll give a little backstory on it. And the question is, how do you like your steak done? And be careful, because we got some comments in the last YouTube video of people that were saying if you like your steak well done, that they're going to sell all their DAG.
Well, they'll be surprised. Well, surprised, I mean, whatever.
Right.
No, I like my steak medium rare.
That is a good answer. Good answer. I'm pretty much in the same boat. It's kind of interesting how Americans view people based on how they like their steak done. Is that something that you've encountered in Germany at all, by any chance?
Oh man, not really. I mean, maybe there's such a thing, but it never occurred to me. I mean, yeah, no. I mean, you know, steak is probably not as much as a thing. It's probably more sausage stuff.
Right.
But I may not be the right, you know, frame of reference for that one.
Right. I would assume that probably Jorgensen is the steak aficionado.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting to hear his answer on that one too. So let's get into more of this. So I would imagine that with all the stuff that you're involved in with the Constellation, that you've probably got a pretty busy workload, probably in meetings a lot all day. What does a typical morning or day look like for Matthias Goldmann? Are you a routine person? Do you have like a firm structure? Or are you a little bit more flexible with what you've got going on from day to day?
Yes and no. I mean, like, I can handle chaos rather well, because that's where the ideas and the creativity come from, and to respond to like immediate needs and, you know, read the energy of a situation and then kind of like react. That's what I'm really good at. At the same time, I mean, you know, the trajectory upon which we've been moving in the past couple of years goes or leads more and more into that direction of getting more, you know, firmer schedules, right? And as the company firms up, like the private life also firms up, right? So yeah. in the beginning, I mean, you know, we had, you know, 14-hour days, and I mean, until quite very recently, and you know, it's still a lot of work. And well, to answer your question, now currently, and I've really gotten to this regimen over the years, so it's nothing I started with, so that's just developed over time. I'll get up in the morning. I'll have a black tea with honey, and then usually I take some of my nootropics and one of the protocols that I think you know about as well, and then I usually a little later a green juice, you know, a light lunch, and then in the afternoon a smoothie, and then a full dinner usually. So that's on the nutritional. And pattern side. And then in
Right.
terms of the work, I usually start by checking feeds. What's the news of the day? Who are my contacts that I on a very frequent basis talk to? What are the follow-ups? What are the responses that came in overnight? So that's the first batch. Then the charts are the third one. So what's been happening in the charts? What's the market doing? And then as a fourth, then it transitions over into the first calls. And usually depending on how the day goes. So this week's been extremely busy. I pretty much had calls back to back the entire day. And then you try to sprinkle in some deep work or some strategic stuff that needs to be pushed. So it's kind of like that balance. But that's usually, how things pan out.
Right. And you've had a lot of experience working with other, large businesses, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. And I would imagine that flexibility that you have and your, I don't know if it's control or maybe command that you maintain in the presence of chaos, I'm sure has been really pivotal, especially in this industry, which is extremely fast moving and can get very chaotic at times. So I would imagine all those things fit together really well. So something that I thought was really interesting about you when I was looking at different pieces of your background is you have done a lot of stuff in the area of personal development, right? And just to say some things, you've taken a couple of NLP courses. Are you an NLP master? Is that
Trainer?
Amazing. So for those who don't know, that's neuro-linguistic programming. Is that right?
Yeah. But I gotta add a caveat here, or not a caveat, or an extension, because in the US, the perception of NLP differs a little bit from how it's being perceived in Germany. And the academy I went to had a much broader approach of what is being taught in the US. So it was pretty much a full-blown training in psychotherapy and the multiple modalities that are being used in very effective psychotherapy. So NLP was merely the base layer framework upon which these other modalities have been plugged into, and they exceed by far of what is usually known in the US.
Right. Yeah, so you have a number of different psycho-spiritual disciplines that you've studied and practiced. Can you elaborate on your background in that area and how you got involved, as it seems to be something you have a tremendous amount of experience in?
Well, that's true. I mean, the reality is, so I do hold an official, how do you say that, license for psychotherapy in Germany that is accredited by the health board. So I'm allowed to do, psychotherapy on people in Germany. And I have done that for a couple of years in my own practice, additionally to whatever job or company I was building. The way I got into this was pretty much in 2005, and there is an academy near Frankfurt where I lived for most of my adult life. And the guy is, I mean, he passed last year. He was one of the most prominent coaches and trainers, psychotherapists in Germany. So I had the honor to actually make friends with him. We were friends for many years. I was in his, close mentorship circle where we had private sessions and stuff. And so it was a 7-year journey of me taking one class after the other. It was usually on the weekends. So while my friends were, dropping pills and snorting lines, I actually went through 2.5 full days on the weekends to the academy. And so, that was my weekend, but it was so interesting. Like, he was one of the best presenters and content, curators that I've ever met in my entire life. And PhD in philosophy and mathematics, and where I ironically actually got the base layer of understanding of what the whole cyberpunk and the logical framework upon which we're moving in cryptocurrencies and decentralized networks. So I actually got my base philosophical training in that academy. Because it really relates to consciousness and how groups of people and organize themselves. So many of these aspects have been spearheaded in the early 70s already as concepts, and then there are mathematical models that have been built on top of that. And I'm already digressing here, but yeah, I used my weekends to really get trained. Usually one class or course would last an entire year, many thousands of hours, and then I would just keep building and adding modalities like hypnotherapy, family constellation, short-term intervention, all types of styles, until literally I had the feeling, okay, now I trust myself that I do have a tool set that is really, really powerful. And then later, after that's been incorporated, I went more onto okay, what's the next steps here? And then I discovered, okay, holotropic breath work, Stanislav Grof, and transpersonal states of consciousness, psycholytic therapy, which is basically LSD psychotherapy, and those frameworks, and then going from there into the actually plant shamanism and those things. And it just kept expanding that funnel of what it means to be a human, and how to operate in this reality, and how consciousness is tied into that entire thing. And I've done a lot of work over the last 10-15 years on myself to get myself into a spot where I don't trip myself up, and it's still, it's still a challenge. I would say entrepreneurship is that thing where, among any other aspect of life, but the path of entrepreneurship is basically where you really hit your glass ceiling in terms of what reality reflects back to you, right? And then it's up to you how you deal with that. And usually those things that get reflected back are so tough because they hit your weak spots. And there's so much processing and so much like stuff that comes up. And that's why, in my opinion, many people fail, not because necessarily the business fails, but because they fail to grow into that next stage of themselves. So yeah,
it's like they can't scale themselves alongside their business in a way.
Right.
What I find really interesting, and something popped into my head, when we were talking about this NLP master guy that you worked with, is when you're talking about he did stuff with mathematics, and I remember hearing a quote popped in my mind. It was, "Math is the language of the universe."
Yeah.
And I always think there's like this interesting. I personally am intrigued by things like quantum physics and that whole world where like consciousness and observation and mindfulness, all these things like blend in, and how we interact with the world around us. What I'm interested in is, how did you go from, because I feel like a lot of people that go down this road and what you're talking about end up like becoming a monk or something, or like you have such a unique background in this area and a lot of wisdom and understanding based on all these things that you've done. How did you bring that into entrepreneurialism? Was there like an opportunity, or was being an entrepreneur something you always had an interest in, or did entrepreneurialism just fit into that realm naturally for you?
I mean, both a little bit, right? I mean, I didn't know that I actually, would become an entrepreneur. Yeah, that was nothing I ever thought would be happening. In Germany, things are very regulated and regimented. So usually you're expected to go to school, you study something, and then you work in what you studied, and you make a career, and the career is pre-planned and predefined, and there's a very clear trajectory of what needs to be ticked off in order to get someplace. Wow. Well, I'm not that kind of person, and I never have been, and it's just not my personality. And so I've been actually not bumming around, but I've tried a lot of different things, and that's in a way unusual, because most people, even from the background where I'm coming from, they can't really transition that easily, because the social framework around them is not really set up like that, or wasn't, at least when I was at that age.
Right.
I think it might have become a little easier with all the digital stuff, but yeah. And so it was that journey, and I realized through that journey that a corporate job is stupid. Like, I'm not like, why would I need to run a predefined course that somebody else has set? Like, that really disagreed with my most fundamental outlook on life, which is I have to be a self-sufficient person, and I need to be able to forge my own path.
Right.
And that's a fundamental like core tenet I hold. But once you start challenging that, especially in Germany, you run into a lot of troubles. I pretty much lost pretty much all my friends that I had from those days, because the entrepreneurial mindset and the path of a person who really forges their own path, that's not included in the model of the German society. You know, to put it in that way. So it's a wake up to my deepest values and who I really am, and that reflected outwards into, okay, the choices I made. And so I started looking, okay, how do you survive in this world if you're not a monk? Like, what is the ways you can actually leverage yourself and what you have as a skill set in order to not work a 9 to 5, in order to be able to work from a beach in Tulum or the mountains in the Carolinas? Or, you know, what would that look like? So it started with that questioning of the status quo. And then I started looking for pieces. Okay, how can I get there? And then, of course, the answer is, yeah, you can get there with money. The other way to get there is probably being that enlightened that just nothing matters anymore.
Right.
So,
right.
But I wasn't realistically, yeah, you know, realistically, I knew I wasn't the latter. So I probably got to figure out somehow how to survive in this thing here, and how can I bring my skills and what I hold dearly at best to the table to forge my own path. And that was the whole start of the journey and everything that came after.
Right. So it sounds to me like entrepreneurialism was how you figured out how to be free in the world. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, because I agree with you. I meditate and I do all the things, and it's like there were times myself too where I felt like this feels good and I feel connected when I do these things, but when I'm not doing those things, I feel disconnected, and but I can't be disconnected from my life. So I'd imagine that's a similar experience you share, experience. Right?
You just said it. You can't be disconnected from your life, and that's exactly the feeling how I would describe it as well. I want to be at the very edge and forefront of my own life.
Yeah.
I want to be in agency, right? Versus if you're stuck in these other environments, you're always at the whim of somebody else, and they do something or the economy does something and you're screwed. Yeah. And that's not my concept of how a sovereign being should be in this world, right. That's just not in my vocabulary.
So I get this theme from you, is that a lot of your deepest philosophies, it's really personal freedom, like the ability to choose for yourself. But I have an interesting question here that I think really feeds into this conversation. By the way, I could have this conversation with you for hours about, and I would imagine you could too. So I understand you spent about 10 years in the executive coaching world, working with Fortune 500 companies and other transnational businesses. How do you feel that your own inner journey has impacted other businesses that you've worked with, or even Constellation?
Okay, I mean, I gotta how do you say, just correct it a little bit. So I have had my own practice, and usually the way I worked is with individuals, and those individuals often were many years older than me. They held executive positions at Siemens or were professors at some university and so on. Sometimes they were our age, sometimes they were younger. Like, it was basically a practice that came. I worked with a doctor, and she recommended basically patients who were ready to make that next step in their personal journey, and they basically came through recommendation. And so we looked at, okay, what are the issues? And usually life is not just like, oh, I lack money and then you do this and this happens. It's like, no. If you're having these fundamental life issues, they percolate into every area of your personality and how it reflects outwardly. So let's go to the source of the issue. What's the real problem here? Your real problem is not having not money or not a partner or a lover or whatever. Let's look what even got you to where you're at right now. And once people are really willing and open, and you basically have the allowance to work on that level, then you can do, magic happens. And then it almost doesn't matter if they are an executive or a housewife or an engineer or an artist. It doesn't matter, because those core human like functionalities and problems that people deal with on an everyday basis, they always come to very similar patterns. So I didn't really go into companies and be like, hey, I'm going to reformat your executive team, and this is the growth metrics, and this is how we put you on a PIP, and this is how we make more revenue the next quarter. It wasn't like that. But in the academy with my mentor and trainer, we did sometimes stuff like that. So I would accompany him on some of these errands where the leadership of BMW would come into his academy for a highly, confidential session, or some of the, executives of the European Central Bank, or, I was part of processes like that, where you look at the entire leadership structure, because usually these things are systems, right? A family is a system, a company is a system, and I'm trained in systems therapy. So that means I have tools where you can look at systemic dysfunctionalities in a given system. And the system is larger than the individual. That means there are dynamics at place that you can't pre-game, right? It's kind of like, it's not quite like chaos theory, but just the system is larger than its parts. And so you need to look at the entire system in order to find out what's really going on. So my lens always, since these days, and you've been asking how does that relate to crypto and my current journey, is I've really been trained, and I've learned over the years to be a systemic thinker and to look at the broader picture and how the pieces interact. And then especially on the consciousness journey, you zoom even more. And then you just start seeing stuff that most people just don't see because they don't have that background. And that enables me to really react, I think, better as an entrepreneur, because it allows me to sniff out stuff and to feel out stuff and to react to things appropriately, which makes it, once you get into the flow and you have a team around you that responds to that action well, you become invincible, because it's just like, okay, like we figured out,
And it always helps to your point, and all the experience that you've had in doing that for yourself gives you a deeper perspective, and maybe even more compassion for the other people that you've worked with. Like that layer of understanding that can't be taught, but maybe experienced by doing the work. I would imagine that you've been able to be a tremendous benefit to others in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, there are stories. I think there are, but I don't. Yeah, I couldn't cite you one right now. You put me on the spot there.
This is the digital.
Unless you have an example right now for me to tie into.
I have a question here, and I think this is actually a nice bridge here. So, as someone who is involved in helping people free themselves from the burden of their self-limitations, or the ego, as it may be called, do you see crypto and distributed networks as something that can have a similar impact on the world and society?
Man, that would be an hour-long discussion. I try to put it as concisely as possible. I've seen crypto literally since the early Bitcoin days. I've seen Bitcoin under $1, and I've been following crypto since then. When Ethereum came around in 2017, there was this big excitement. And personally, I started immediately developing business ideas around Ethereum and how the world would change. And then I started stepping back a little bit in 2014 with Ethereum. And after, I brainstormed already with my partner, and we had already, businesses lined up. But then I stepped a step back and I was like, okay, let's view it from both sides. That's the positive future to work towards to. That's what I want to see.
Right.
But how has stuff reacted in the past in an historical context? And whenever there's, you know a little bit about history, and you look at how usually patterns play out in a society or globally, just the schematics of it, then it's like, okay, there's not always there's both sides. It's good and it's bad. And let me see, how does the bad side look like? And well, I explored that, and I basically said, well, the bad side is that everybody just looks at the money, and it just gets into a frenzy, and nobody cares about the tech. And that's exactly what happened in 2017.
Right.
It's hard for me to give you a final answer on that question, because I view everything, from both points, and depending on how it shakes out.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that our intention does shape things. So it, even if you see both sides, it matters. It matters what intention you put in and how you roll, basically, right? So it's not completely neutral.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say, to give you maybe a little bit more meat, financial freedom is a big point for a lot of people, and especially generations of our age and younger. If you just look at the economic stats, those generations have been fucked by their parents' generation, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
Right. So the economic model, and that's also something I realized when I was 18, so 1989.
Mm-hmm.
That when I still basically my last year in high school, I realized I'm never gonna retire with a German retirement pension fund, because the entire model is fundamentally flawed. And there was a lucid moment I clearly remember, and I made a conscious decision that I'm not going to rely on that system to pay my retirement when I'm whatever 70 years old. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. Sorry for the language here, but that's how I felt about it. And I was like, okay, this doesn't work. This is bogus. And so now, you see how things are shaking out. We have the highest inflation, more money printed in 2 years than in the 100 years before, and stuff like that. House prices go through the roof, even though supposedly everybody lost their jobs. Like the entire social contract around money and money transfer and basically living well has been destroyed. And now you can come up with all kinds of reasonings and blah, blah. It doesn't really matter. The social contract has been screwed, and people, while they may not be able to put their finger on the precise thing, they know that they've been screwed with, and that there is often no real future. Like, what future do you present a kid that gets born or is now 15, 16 years? What's the future that is being painted for them? Yeah. Right? And that goes back also into the entire societal structures. Like, what do we see when you switch on the TV? Is there anybody talking about a positive view of the future? Like, are we actually creating collectively a positive future? Right. Is that what we're doing? Right. No. Whatever you switch on, if it's your social media or whatever, you're being pumped with negative programming and negative news. And so, well, if there's no positive input, how would you even come to create a positive future if everybody's just being bombarded with BS? So right. So and that's kind of like the world we kind of live in. And so basically the fundamental contracts are broken. And so I do think that crypto, on the good side, and also the hyper speculation and all these things, they enable people to step out of their predefined bracket of being a loser, or predefined bracket of being, oh, you're supposed to be this because you just didn't have the means to be that, right? And so crypto goes like, well, if you're lucky, or you work, or even more so working hard, and you're learning and studying, and ultimately you'll be rewarded, and you'll be able to step out of your predefined bracket, which then reshuffles the entire game of what you could be in your life, what you could be as a person, and that ultimately, could free up a lot of locked in potential as a whole society. So even that aspect can be seen very positively, and then, of course, that threatens legacy institutions and all that stuff. And
an added layer of complexity in the mix.
So there's always both ways to view things. So very interesting question.
Yeah, and you know what? I was just thinking about too, in regards to what you're saying. Like, you turn on the news. I haven't had cable TV in probably 6 years. I don't get anything, from that world. But what I've noticed something about crypto, and I know you've probably seen this as well, is that for a lot of people, crypto has like brought some hope for people in a lot of different ways. And as regards to, like, you said, when you bring a kid into this world, like, what are they supposed to do? Go to school, go to college, you got to pay all this stuff, and then you get into, like, the whole thing. You're right. I believe is also like pretty fundamentally broken. And then from a community aspect, I've noticed that crypto communities are like bridging this like new family ecosystem, kind of into a world that's like a little fundamentally broken. Like, even in my experience, like, crypto to me is a lot more of a positive place to be than some other things that I've been a part of in the past, or when I look at what's going on in the world, especially, right? So
Yeah,
with that all being said, I came across a few, and we're gonna switch
sure.
topics here a little bit.
Let's do it.
But I love how you've clearly really have thought these things through, and have a lot of perspective on all the things going on. But I came across a few writings that you've done
Mm.
in the area of what I might call biohacking.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be something that you're really passionate about. Are there any specific practices that you're currently engaging in? And what are some of the differences that you've seen in performance with other types of practices?
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting that you bring that up. Yeah, so I'm part of a writers collective that's called High Dose Wisdom, and they, have a couple of people that publish content on fringe topics and out there topics, and things that are not mainstream usually. And so one of the things I've discovered in a period where there was a lot of stress and a lot of strain in my life, namely the early Constellation days, and I really looked at, okay, what can be done to improve health and performance and clarity of mind. And I started really researching for weeks on end and reading research papers and so on. And I came up with a regimen for myself that is centered around peptides. So peptides are, amino acid chains, and there are several, different categories of peptides. And again, I'm not making here any medical recommendations. I'm just sharing what I've discovered for myself. And basically, these compounds have really almost miraculous properties in how they can restore broken, tissues and bones, and also improve gut, the gut bacteria, and also, interestingly enough, increase cognition and cognitive functions. And so I tried a regimen and tried it for several months, and then I thought, okay, this is pretty cool, because it took me quite a while to really nail down all the details. So I was like, okay, it would be amiss if I didn't share that with the world. So that's where that came about. And to be honest, that thing got read 55,000 times. For some reason, it really made it into Google somehow. That was my first post, and for some reason it just got really well distributed. And it was a success. And
well, it was written very well, and you had sources. You broke down some of the different papers. I got involved in the biohacking world years ago with Bulletproof. It started with Bulletproof. Are you familiar with Bulletproof?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so Bulletproof Coffee, and then Dave Asprey and all the stuff that he does. Then I got thrown into the world of like light therapies, like red and near infrared light therapy, experimented with other some other colors for like cognition boosting. nootropics, like all those things. And I've certainly benefited and noticed a difference from those. But there were some too that I like would try and I'd be like,
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't really get this one. So I'm just like, yeah, the placebo's not even working, you know.
Right. Right.
So is this like whole thing of like diving deep into a you seem like someone when you get really interested in something that you don't go surface level with it. Would you
No,
consider that
no,
true?
yeah, you're right. I mean, when I when I smell blood, I want to know everything.
Right.
Like I'll go as deep until I really have the feeling I understand pretty much, I wouldn't say everything, but sufficiently and deeply enough that I can form a cohesive, you know, picture around that. And yeah, like I said, I'm always interested in stuff that really works. And the truth of the matter is, in the world we live in, there is not much stuff that's being promoted that really works.
Right.
Because there are so many monetary interests behind pretty much everything that happens nowadays, that it's actually hard to find something that truly makes a difference. And so that's where that kind of stuff comes from.
Hmm. Yeah, it's almost like kind of goes back to do your own research, I guess
Yeah.
you could say, right? You know, it's like the things that are really helpful in this world don't get the pedestal, you know, and it is unfortunate because I would imagine like yourself, it's natural to us because like we want to be helpful and do good things for people. And it's like, well, why? It's almost like there's a people have, you know, their own disconnect that creates this uh, pharmaceutical world that we live in where like a lot of these supplements and things are either banned or, you know, just, you know, straight up, you're not allowed to do that or
Right, right.
not given the spotlight when they could be truly helpful and healing. And that's a whole rabbit hole. And
Oh, that's a whole rabbit hole right there. However, to contrast, again, multiple
I
viewpoints,
love it.
um, you know, I've also seen the opposite. And it's very easy to say, oh, the FDA and whatever, they're all like crooks and they're just in for the money,
Right.
la di la di la, you know, that whole narrative. But then what happens on the other spectrum is there's these people in these like supplement and weird devices type of, like, there's a whole freaking industry around devices that don't work, that are being sold for thousands of dollars. And that's a whole other rabbit hole I know very well, where people are literally being scammed out of their last dollars because they have some severe or chronic illness or whatever, and they are pinning their last inch of hope to that treatment that is, you know, not approved. There's no studies, there's just marketing around, and there's like hundreds of these out there. And then people really, you know, give their last dime to these things and they hope they can cure themselves of something, and it just doesn't work. And those guys behind those schemes, they are making millions, and they are literally exploiting the weakest in their weakest moments of life.
Yeah.
And that is, I can't even say how despicable I find that. And so having seen that, you know, there is a reason why we have agencies like the FDA, and why we have several institutions to curb ruthless people like that. And these people, then they use, oh yeah, the FDA and blah 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 blah. It's like, no, you just don't want to prove, you don't want to do the burden, the scientific burden of proving that there's actually something to it, to what you're claiming you're doing. And then it's like lazy marketing. It's like, oh yeah, the easy enemy, it's the FDA and blah blah blah. It's like, you know, there's a you know, a nuance, there's a
Check and
gray
balance,
area.
checks and
Yeah,
balances on some
yeah,
level, which is absolutely
yeah.
necessary, especially when there's a lot of money at stake. You know what's funny? If I had just came into this conversation and I heard you say that, that could be very easily applied to the crypto world.
Yep.
It's like, you know, you just have a fancy idea and a lot of marketing, and we see that, you know, I guess that would what we would call a rug pull of sorts, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, a lot of rug pulls in in the medical.
A lot of rugs being woven and pulled. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this whole other side of you that's from Germany that we might not know much about. And I don't know if we've covered this fully in this conversation, but What made you leave Germany and come to the US, and what was that transition process like? Because I would imagine, like, I've never been to Germany, but I would imagine moving to another a part of the world where I may not have family or they're speaking a different, cultural differences, language differences. What was that whole experience like for you?
I mean, okay. Um, so my partner is American.
Mhm.
So I've actually, while I studied, I've been awarded a scholarship for the US. So I've studied one semester at UW La Crosse in Wisconsin, and many Americans will probably laugh because it's not an Ivy League or whatever, but it was a great experience. My first American girlfriend was from Wisconsin, so I'm very familiar with the culture. And even though many parts of the US have very specific avenues to them. Um, so my first culture shock happened then, which was in 2000, I think 2005 or 4, something like that. So basically before I finished my master's, I quickly studied abroad, basically, and that happened to be the US. So that's when I had my first culture shock. And then ever since then I worked for a company. So I worked for the European Central Bank as an IT training manager. So I always was very how do you say, I always liked the English language for some reason. I
Right.
always felt connected to it. I really wanted to learn it when I was younger. I read a Lord of the Rings in English when I was in 10th grade,
I love
like just,
that book.
and that was before Amazon. So I had to go to the bookstore and actually order especially the English edition of Lord of the Rings. And there were all these like weird words in there that I didn't know, like glade and like these old school words. And so I had this little scanner that would scan out of the book the words and it would translate it. And so that's how I built up my vocabulary, like when I was younger. And so I always just liked the English language. And then, I worked for the European Central Bank where everybody, the language was English. And then with the other company I worked for, they did some SAP-based consulting. So there was a whole rollout project where they rolled out a global software launch in Brazil, Mexico, Canada, the US. And I traveled 3 months through all these countries, consulting and advising those guys who did install the software. so and then coming from that and having spent vacations and all that stuff in the US with my previous girlfriends and then coming to the US there was no rift. It was a very smooth, there was no culture shock. It was very seamless because I knew already what was going on.
Right.
And yeah.
Is there a favorite place that you've visited, having done all these different things?
I mean, I've seen a good part of the world. I'm not a super traveler, but I've seen a good bunch. Of all the places. I mean, not necessarily. I mean, the business trip was very interesting because, I mean, just experiencing Brazil like that was amazing. Obviously with the guys who took care of me there, we went to, the rum distilleries and the local churrascarias and, all the, it was pretty awesome. But in terms of traveling, I would say Peru is one of the ones that really stands out to me.
I can see you really liking Peru.
Yeah.
I could totally see that. Yeah.
The Amazon and the mountains with Cusco. That's definitely something, I want to go back to.
Right.
Yeah.
So I found this video of you, which was super helpful for me, as well as I was watching it, and it was entrepreneurialism and the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know which video I'm talking about? You were presenting.
That's I think one of the only videos that exists of me online before I came to the US.
Yes. And it was truly an amazing presentation, and it really also displayed your wide range of different things like you were talking about history and the hero's journey and all these different things. And so I had this question after I watched it. I had this question, which was, when you reflect on these last few years and your journey from Germany to the US, was there ever a moment where you thought this may not work out, or there was some really scary or tremendous challenge you were faced with? What did you do during those tough times to face those challenges and keep moving forward as the hero in your own journey?
Wow, very well put. I don't know really a lot of people who have a journey like that, and
Right.
and doing it like that is really, really tough.
Yeah.
Like, people think, oh yeah, these crypto people, blah blah blah, and so on. And no, it was really, really tough. I left an environment that I knew, and even though the US is, coming from a system where no matter if you fail or not, you will get a house, you'll get food, you get payment by the state, to be fully exposed to the full brunt of, oh, you got to look into the sun now, it's like, okay, if I go over there, I had $15,000 in my bank account when I came over, one suitcase, and I landed in San Francisco without knowing anybody. So, and, so I rented a car. Yeah, I rented a car. I went downtown San Francisco right after landing and went into my first meetup. And so that's how I started. And then I went home, quote unquote home, which was a shared bunk room with 4 Chinese guys in Mountain View on Villa Street, So, and if you come through that angle like that, there's no corporation that ships your stuff over, that sets you up with people and colleagues and friends, and I literally just airdropped into an area, and I just trusted that I'll make my way, right? And money was definitely an issue. And if you don't have a credit score and a credit card, it's really, really, like, there's a whole different ball game that people usually don't understand. Is like, it took me 6 months until I could even buy a car, because I didn't have a credit score. And you only get the credit score once you get, there's a whole slew of processes to even get started. And even if you have that, then it's still not easy, right? And then having, I came from this well-defined background with names and brands that are, even my university, Frankfurt University, in Europe, that's cool. But coming to the Valley, you're nobody. Like, I literally had to let go of everything I knew and everything I thought I was. Right. And I just was a nobody, like millions of others that were trying to make it, talking to random people in random meetups where everybody's clobbering over each other, trying to make it, pitching themselves with themselves, basically the wrong pitch to the wrong person, right? So and forming that, like, primordial mess into something where, the path that emerged now, that's a whole different ball game than most people are exposed to. So yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that really is like the I'm not exactly sure which tick on the hero's journey that would be, but the one where it's like, this is the challenge. I was like faced with a decision. I could either make it work, and you sound like the type of person who's like the burn your boats. Are you familiar with that?
100%. Oh, 100%. Yeah. And that's what I did. When I came over, I knew I would never go back. And I never intended to. That was never an option for me, because no, I made my choice in my life, and either join or die, it's
right.
So there was no fallback, no double bottom, no nothing. And I think that looking back, that's what really propelled me, because there was no option for failure, because failure in the US system means you're literally sleeping under a bridge.
Right.
And that's not going to happen.
Yeah. And what's interesting, and I would imagine, now, not my personal experience, but you say like, the entrepreneurial cultural differences between somewhere like Germany and US, and maybe why it's more prevalent in the US, I would imagine, is maybe because it's like those that are willing, like, you have no choice. Like, if you're going to do it, you have to just do it. Like, there's no fallback option. Like, if you fail, no one's there to help you. Like, you have to be all in. And I would imagine that not having like a safety net of some kind weeds out those who are willing or not willing to take the journey.
Yep, I agree. And so if you ask me what I did in those moments, I mean, you know, it was excruciatingly hard, especially in the beginning. But, you know, and then, yeah, how do you process that? Well, failure is not an option, but you still have the weight of living a life, right? So how do you process that? You can only go but forward, and to hold that space within yourself where you push against yourself and walk forward, even though it's basically hurting you to the bone. That's kind of like what then spurred growth. And obviously, you know, I also, you know, in order to process, went to, you know, I wasn't completely alone in the sense of that I have tools at my disposal where I can explore, you know, things from certain angles that can, you know, where I can process that emotional load. Without that, you know, it's very difficult, and that's a whole other thing to talk about.
Right. It's like you know, allowing the emotion of fear to be there, and just I have a mission. I have my intention and my mission.
Exactly. And like you said, the hero's journey, I mean, it's really true in the way I perceive it. And the only thing that's holding us back is fear. And then people come up with all kinds of excuses or ideas of why they are failing, or why things are the way they are. But ultimately, it always comes down back to fear. It's like, I feared that this would happen. I feared that I couldn't do this or that. And then it's basically that movie that plays in their heads. And then, but by allowing that movie to take over, they're actually taking steps in their life that gets them away from where they want to be. And also, you know, one of the tools I used is just stepping back, is like, okay, what is your physical determined outcome? What do you want this to be? And that's the goal. And right now I'm here and it doesn't look like I'm reaching the goal. But the question then is, do I walk further that path, or do I abort the path? And that's, I think, one of the important questions when you're in these spaces, is like, you ask yourself, drop it, leave it, or stay with it? And am I stupid while staying with it or not? And the answer that I always had for myself was, I'm gonna, like, if I'm not starving, I want to see this journey to the end. If the journey tells me that it's over, I will know. And then the journey is over. But I embarked on the journey and I want to see where it goes. And if it's over, it's over. Then I'm actually relieved, you know, that part of me who doesn't want to fight is going to be relieved, because the journey is over. But the journey itself told me that it's over. It's not me bailing out. That's a different kind of like thing. So for example, yeah, exactly. So for example, if the early Constellation days, you know, if I had been fired, okay, that is the journey telling me the journey's over, right? So, but of course, I could have riled myself up beforehand and be like, am I getting fired? Am I not getting fired? What is happening? What is happening? What is happening? And then I rile myself up and I do stuff in the external that actually triggers other people to fire me, because I'm completely out of line and out of whack. So and that's how people sabotage themselves as well, right? So you have that fear movie playing, and it's kind of, okay, really holding it back. Where do you want to go? Where's the journey? Did the journey say yes or no? And am I cool with just riding it out? That's how I got through.
You know, I felt through your explanation there, almost a sense of relief. The whole like, oh, the journey will tell you thing. Like when you said that, made my mind just go, got it. Like, I'll know. Like, I don't have to figure it out because I'll know, type of thing.
Right.
So yeah. So that's really, that's beautiful. So kind of bring it back into crypto. How you said you were really early, it sounded like, you said you saw Bitcoin under $1. Is that wow?
Yeah.
You are the only person I know loosely, you know, we're talking through the screen here, that's gotten in that early. How did you first get involved in there, and what kind of like kept you in that world?
I mean, that's a longer journey, but I really started looking into cross-border money transfers back in the day. And for some reason, I don't even remember it anymore, but I stumbled across the Bitcoin Talk forum. And back in the day, I wasn't really like a forum or internet person that would hang out and stuff. I would passively like browse it and, you know, but I found Bitcoin, I read the white paper and I found it very interesting. And they had Mount Gox already at the time. And the way it worked in those days in Europe, they had a French bank account, and you would wire, you know, a SEPA wire to that French bank account. And like 5 days later, you would get some amount of BTC in your wallet. No
Wow.
questions asked. But you know, so that's how that stuff worked in at that time. And I was like, I was working for Price Waterhouse at that time. And I was like, and I did KYC, AML, money laundering audits. At that time, I audited real estate hedge funds and AML, KYC stuff. And it was the real estate bubble that just had burst. And I went to all these like Fortune 500 banks and put a letter on the table. It's like, hey guys, I want to speak to your CEO. I'm the auditor. You know, like, give me all your KYC stuff. So I've been that guy. I've been that guy. And so I knew, I was like, oh, you know, this is a financial asset. When this gets a little bigger, they're going to put KYC as the first step. And, you know, then the journey was like, as it happened. But I got to say, I'm not a billionaire because I don't hold any of those Bitcoins anymore. I lost them, you know, on an old hard drive. Not that lucky in that regard, but I saw the entire journey. Right. And then all the Bitcoin altcoins came around, you know, Darkcoin, and they had hundreds of Bitcoin altcoins in the day. People usually don't remember that. And when that happened, I got that. I was working a full-time job, and I got that whiff of that first frenzy of altcoins, and I was like, I'm not interested anymore. You know, and back in the day, everybody was like, Bitcoin's a Ponzi, Bitcoin's a Ponzi, Bitcoin's a Ponzi. So you didn't really know. Like, I didn't know anybody else who was involved in it. Like, you know, right. It's like everybody's saying, oh, Ponzi is like, I had a couple Bitcoins, but it's like, you don't know, right? And I didn't have funds that I can just throw around. It's like, yeah, put 10K in here and just keep it. It's like, no, that's not, you know, I was too young, too broke, you know? Right. So that's the truth here. But then when I started getting into entrepreneurship, that's when I discovered DEFCON 0 with Ethereum, and it really majorly clicked. And I literally called up all my friends and I was like, hey guys, this is going to be New York Times headlines in 2 years from now. Quote me on that. And some of them were developers and engineers, and they just be like, what are you talking about? I don't know, whatever, go away. Right? German attitude. That's a German attitude right there for you. Well, and that's what got me hooked, because I knew this was decisive and game changing. And then the journey into crypto started from there. Wow.
Very early. I guess you were a little spot on with your prediction there for the most part.
I know I was, but you know, the early doubters, if you would tell them, they're like, you know. But that's just one of the things, if I can chime in there quickly, is like, that's what I learned through the journey, is like, oftentimes my assessments are pretty accurate, even though they are very early. I can see how things potentially can unfold, and that's a skill I think that's also very helpful in entrepreneurship, right? To see true potential and what the impacts on a societal level could potentially be, right? So yeah. Anyway,
to have the foresight and read trends and direction is. I mean, I think if you don't have that as an entrepreneur, you don't know where to get started. Really.
Right.
And then so you're no stranger to FUD. You've been around since FUD was any type of a thing around crypto, it sounds like.
That's true.
Oh man.
Yeah, and then also don't forget the early Ethereum FUD. So all the Bitcoin OGs, I mean, they were hammering ETH when ETH started just perking up a little bit, like the first, what was it, from from $2 to $7, the first ETH little blossoming flower. I mean, ETH got hammered so hard by the BTC maxis until it basically hit the 300 mark. It was just ruthless. And then I think it got a little better because everything just grew bigger. But until then, I mean, they just really tried to stamp that one out. Like,
I can totally see that, because there's so much tribalism.
Yeah.
Like, and it still exists in various forms, throughout because everyone wants their, thing to win. And like, I totally get that. But it is almost like the culture world wars almost, in a way.
Yeah.
So from all that, how did you then become introduced to Constellation? What is that?
So look, so when I landed, I actually tried to build up a coaching business in the Valley, because my thesis was, with all the skills I have a very unique skill set that can really propel people to really truly change. Right. And what I perceived is like that Californian type of like, is like, yeah, I'm in therapy, but nothing ever changes. And the tools I had were like, no, if you really want to do something, I'm here. I can get you into the spots where you really can make a change, right? So I was like, hey, this should be really perceived very well in Cali, right? So and then I landed and I realized people were not on that trajectory to actually really change themselves, even though that's the general theme, and there is a subset of people, but you don't find them usually in entrepreneurship. So I was like, but then, being exposed to that, I just couldn't build that business, to be honest. It just didn't work, that coaching business, because it was just not the right product market fit, so to speak. Right. And then I was like, okay, what else am I good at? What else do I have knowledge of? And then I started going to crypto meetups, and I got to know people. I got introduced to Wyatt and Ben and the team, and that's how the journey started. And then all of a sudden I realized, well, I have built a successful business, which I never had gotten validation before in Germany, because everybody was like, why would you not work a corporate job? What's wrong with you? Wow. Right? So out of that environment, I built a business that had 1 million ARR in the first year. And I thought I was a failure when I came to the States, because nobody had given me any validation. And then I came to the Valley and people were talking like, oh, we're cash flow neutral after 3 years. And I was like, fuck yes, you really fucking nailed it, right? So and then I was like, oh, okay, that's when I started realizing, okay, actually I've done something really great already. I have a whole bunch of knowledge, and I'm very early in crypto. I've seen a lot, and I can really help shape that company, and so that's how the journey started. And yeah,
and here we are today.
Yeah.
So how long ago was that?
I arrived in, I think, 1st of April 2017.
Wow. And here we are, almost 2022. This year has flown.
Yeah.
Like crazy. I can't even believe it's halfway through September. So you've clearly been around in the crypto space. You're a true OG, right? So someone who's seen a lot of different projects, come and go and blossom throughout the years, you've seen a lot of things rise and fall. What made you come on board fully with Constellation, and really like put not all your eggs in one basket, but the whole, again, burn your boat. I burned my boats here. Like I'm here.
Yeah.
Like your belief in the, kind of going back to, is it the technology? Is it that and the vision of the team? Like, is that where it all comes together?
Yeah, both. I mean, I saw the technology and the idea, and talking early to Wyatt, I was like, okay, this is really something, a defining watershed kind of like possibility. It's a zero to one, or however it's either gonna fail or it's gonna go really big. And and that's always the ambivalence, like success, failure, and in Constellation, that's for me was always like exacerbated. Some businesses, they have, oh yeah, we have a little cash flow here, but Constellation always was a 0 to 1 from the beginning. It either really is going to be really successful or it's going to fail completely.
Right.
And there's not going to be much in between, because either it proves out to be that thing or it doesn't. There's, it's like, you know what I mean? So the technology had that defining characteristics where I'm like, okay, Bitcoin, Ethereum, DAG. That's the third generation of possibilities with its all the attachments that it could have on society, on everything else that I haven't seen with any of the other approaches at that time. And then the second thing was the team. Like, you have to have a very eclectic mix of people to pull something like that off. And that's the dance, as they say in German, the dance on the volcano, right? That it means there is genius in there, but there's also counter forces, and it's the wrestling of pulling those forces into reality, right? And that's a whole other process we could talk about, but so it's the team and the idea, because I've seen a lot of ideas that are fundamentally, that have that vibe of groundbreaking, but you just look at the team and you feel the energy of those guys, and you just know that they're not going to pull it off.
Yeah.
Or at least that's the judgment, right? But you never know. There's always the wild card. But that's how that's why I did that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all thank you for that. And, so with that being said, what about the crypto space frustrates you the most? Because you seem to be someone like you're strong in your convictions and what you believe. Just taking a general look at the whole space and all its different aspects. Is there anything about this general space that kind of frustrates you, or is maybe even disappointing on some level?
Yeah, what I don't like is some of the stuff is like, you talk to people for 2 years, for example, right? And there's all this, hey brother, that bro talk, and oh yeah, we're best friends and whatever. And then from 0 to 100, all of a sudden it's just like, what just happened, and seeing that. I mean, I have a concept for that, which is also, like we discussed before, I think people hit their mental glass ceilings, and because crypto is such a pressure cooker of everything, right? And people come from all kinds of backgrounds. They don't have the mental capacities or the tool sets to really, oftentimes break through their own glass ceilings. And in crypto, you just see that very obviously, because it just puts so much pressure on everybody. So all the weak spots will be exacerbated and blown up disproportionately, because it's just so high growth and so high loss. and the people dynamics and that ever-changing landscape of relationships, and that just puts and then all the scams, and it tests your emotional stability to the core all the time, and it shows you your own shortcomings. And if you're not equipped to deal with that, then you see those dynamics. And it just, for me, it's just like, I find there is an aspect of inauthenticity to many of those things. It's like, hey bro, hey bro, hey bro. And I'm like, what? What are we talking about here? You want something from me, or and there, so, and then on the opposite side, there are relationships that are genuinely, that would have not happened in any other way or environment, where I learn things, and I see aspects of people that really humble me, where I'm like, I would have never been able to witness that in any other environment. So it's both perspectives, but if you put the finger on one, that's the one that annoys me.
Right. No, and I would agree. And I think people know and do see that like level of inauthenticity that happens. And maybe it's not even just relative to crypto, but maybe in business in general, when they're exactly what you said, when there's a lot to lose and a lot to gain, it kind of breeds that like undertone of like agenda sometimes. And it can be really
always, most of the times. Yeah,
absolutely. So with that being said, did that level of like frustration, because this is what I find interesting and something that I really love, like this potential frustration of like inauthenticity, or not being able to like really trust what people are doing. Did that have some level of impact in your creation of like the Lattice Council, and how that kind of creates this thing of like trust and like, we can verify that what we're doing is authentic and real and true.
What specific aspect of the Lattice Council, like
So
you're
just
shooting
kind of
at?
how it goes through like the submitting process.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I built the early Constellation governance group, so I'm no stranger to, governance and those ideas. I formulated the Constellation Constitution. I think that's on our website in collaboration, but I spearheaded that. That was basically my idea, and kind of like establishing those values. And is like, okay, who are we? Which values do we stand for? What do we want to do? And then the Lattice Council is an extension of that. We handed Constellation governance over to the community mainly. So the pods that we have, sprung out of that, and they reorganized themselves, which was always the idea, to not have me spearhead that. I just incepted it and then people run with it, which is, the ideal outcome. And on Lattice, we have the Lattice Council, where we pulled in, really well-known stakeholders of the industry. So our Stardust Collective business pod from the Constellation governance group, they are vetting those projects. They have I think almost more than 40 submissions. They are really doing an outstanding job vetting those and really weeding the ones out that where the team or the business model, or where it's just a cash grab, just riffraff out of go away. And then they only forward the A-listers to the listing council, and the listing council is just the checks and balances to make sure that there's no nepotism, or where it's like, okay, basically what you've seen in many of the DEXs and so on is like they have just adopted many of the practices of centralized exchanges, and which are known bad.
Right.
So they just fell into the same paradigm, and at least I wanted to try to be a little different. And at the same, you need to have a listing process that works, and you want to enable people to list, but it cannot be fully decentralized, because it's like the way of how things work, it just doesn't work, and so you need to find a balance. So we have come up with that 3-step process, where we have a maximum community engagement, we have the maximum amount of decentralization, but we have a checks and balances that makes sure that it's not just getting messy or nepotistic.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So here's a fun little question, and it relates to like your individual vision of everything that you're building now. I'd imagine like you all have your direction that you all want to go to, and an aligned vision. But what does a fully matured like hypergraph look for you? Where do you see this thing based on like kind of your unique perspective look like in 5 years, in like let's say a best case scenario? Because what I'm gathering from you is that you're always evaluating both sides, which I think is really important in life in general. So what does that kind of look like for you?
That's a interesting question. So we always have a thesis, right? We have these growth spurts, I would call them, where we put out a thesis, we define the thesis, and then we work towards the thesis. And most of the times, sometimes we were right, sometimes we were wrong, but oftentimes when we define it, so as an example, we had, we were trying to build up our company to $100 million market cap for this year. so that was our first goal, and we superseded that pretty much immediately. But when those things happen, and then the second goal was, we reached the first goal after 3 months, and it was like, yeah, we're not going to retire this year. It's like, okay, let's make a goal that we probably won't reach. So we said, okay, let's try $1 billion. Well, we hit the $1 billion. But what happens at these stages, and that's just one example, there are many other examples of that, is once you hit that area, the emotional feeling of being there is very different from when you say and scope it, right? So there, it's a whole other ballpark. And so that's what I want you to keep in the back of my mind when I say what I'm going to say now, which is the ultimate expression in my mind is data derivatives on NASDAQ based on the hypergraph.
Gotcha. Yeah, I see that. And that is a never-ending story there. Right. And that's where I think that huge.
Well, but you see, that defines an entirely new paradigm of how data can be traded, how data can be valued. Like there's a whole thing there. And that's what I see in its, but that area, if and when we hit that, that's going to be a ballpark that I cannot even scope out properly right now, because we would learn as we go into that direction what unfolds, right? It's so big. It's so big. I understand what it kind of means, but to live it and to experience it, that would be, I don't even know how I would frame that.
Right. And that's why you said the how you feel versus how you experience that would be because you would get there and you'd be like, well, now what from here?
Yeah, that would be probably the time where there would be other causes that need my energy.
Right. Of course. Oh, yeah. That
because yeah. I mean, look, at that stage, I mean, you know, that yeah.
That's huge. Is there any particular moment during your time with Constellation that you pride yourself on, that you felt really accomplished in?
Yeah, I mean, there are many moments, right? I mean, in terms of a general felt sense, I'm glad that I challenged myself to the story and journey. So as an overall thing, because it has been rewarding on so many levels.
Right.
In terms of specific deliverables, I'm very happy about the token life cycle, which is, I'll publish very soon a little bit of a write-up. I presented it in our accelerator, which I think is really a cool concept that allows new entrepreneurs to kind of like really wrap their head around, tokenized entrepreneurship. And I like that concept. I'm proud that I came up with that. so just hands down. And that's cool. So, and I'm not only saying that just because, but the feedback has been tremendously, good. So that's why I'm, presenting that. But there are many other moments, of course, as well.
Right, of course. And it's been a very, exciting year for Constellation in a lot of different ways. And what you guys have all done, it's really quite amazing. So here we have the closing question here. And I figured this one fit really, really well with you in regards to, your background and all these different experiences that you've had over these years. As someone who went from, leaving Germany to having, as you've said, like basically nothing in this country, to being a multi-tech founder, to really being the embodiment of what is classically known as the American dream. Do you have any advice for someone who is afraid to take that leap into something brand new?
Yeah. If you're somebody out there who has an internal urge or craving into whatever direction that may be, then resisting that urge is like resisting a birth. You can fight against it, and it's going to pain you a lot. And if you fight against it too much, the birth will be a stillbirth, but you'll be stunting your own process significantly. So if you're someone who has an urge to express something in yourself, then you have to follow that. It's almost you have no choice. And if you fight it, you'll just make your life a misery.
Yeah, that is, wow. that is a serious one. I really love that. It's like fighting a birth, because it's almost like life is pulling it out of you and telling you to meet this thing. And as someone myself who's been in the entrepreneur world, that is something for me to hear too is really impactful. To go on those instinctual urges, I think, is amazing, even when there is the fear of failure or something new. And I think you have obviously really embodied what it's like to be a true entrepreneur and go through this whole hero's journey to be where you are now.
I love it. Thank you so much. That's a wonderful closing statement. And I mean, to be honest, I wish I could, ask you more questions, but we're hitting the end of the hour. I know this was about me, but I mean, very interesting what you've kind of like let shimmer through about yourself. And I can only thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, well, thank you. The pleasure is mine. I've absolutely loved this conversation and chatting with you, and really getting to know you more. Really paints a different picture for what's going on with all of us in this community, and it's really important. And we'd love to hear, and I know everyone in the same way that they loved the last Founders episode. Really allows us to be more connected with who you guys are, and it helps me personally appreciate all the hard work even more. So I just want to say thank you for that. And I'm excited for us to, have whatever question and be connected in whatever way we can be moving on. So I say we land the plane.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eric.
Absolutely, Matthias. So everyone, I will put some extra information in the description below the video. And again, I just want to say, Matthias, thanks for coming on for episode 2 of the Founder Series here at the Digital Dive.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.